Today, we're going to be talking about asset protection with Australia's leading property tax strategist, Ken Race. Now, it may not be a sexy topic, but it's extremely important because asset protection is the use of smart legal strategies to protect what's yours. For example, we're going to be discussing why people who own their properties in their own names are putting their assets at risk, and why it's crucial even for homeowners, not just property investors, to have asset protection strategies in place. You see, many of us are dreaming of building a substantial property portfolio. However, very few of us are taught about the importance of asset protection. Even solutions, as I said, for owning your own home. The problem is currently we're living in an age of extreme financial uncertainty, but it's natural under these sort of circumstances for people to want to protect the assets they've worked so hard to accumulate. They're looking for strategies that are going to safeguard them from the fickle hand of fate or to stop others taking what's rightfully theirs. Now, I know you may well have insurance, but it will protect against some risks, but not against all risks. So smart investors look for ways of protecting their assets from their creditors, and that's what we're going to talk about. So welcome to today's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, because at the end of today's show, you're going to have a bit more clarity about what you could be doing or should be doing to pass on your assets, because you're going to have kept them and protected them.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
One of the aims of my podcast is to help you become more financially successful and help you grow, protect and pass on your wealth. And what we're going to talk about in today's show with my business partner, Ken Race, who's widely regarded as Australia's leading property tax strategist, is the protection bit, the asset protection. We're going to teach you how to keep more of your assets and not to lose them to, well, I assume Ken's going to teach us who not to lose them to. So welcome, Ken.
Thank you, Michael.
Now, I know most people by now know a lot about you, but in case they don't, for many years you were an accountant and managing partner of a national accounting firm. Well, I guess you're still an accountant, but you don't do regular accounting work. Instead, you give high-level wealth advice to our clients at Metropole Wealth Advisory. But Ken, you're not a theorist. You're a successful property investor, a business owner, an entrepreneur with accounting and financial planning, and in fact, real estate qualifications. Boy, that's a mouthful. And I guess that's why you're able to give holistic advice, a holistic approach to our clients to help them grow, protect and pass on their wealth. So as I said in the beginning, let's talk about protection. Let's start with the obvious question. What is asset protection?
Yeah, it's an interesting term. It's really protecting the equity that you've built up over a period of time. For a lot of people, a lifetime's work to build up equity. They've bought assets, they've grown in value. And what we've seen in the majority of cases, people fixate on protecting the actual asset when they should be fixated on protecting the money that they've created.
That's a different thing, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's really the money you should be looking at. Then you can be a lot smarter with the methods and the strategies to protect that equity from unwanted litigation. I mean, you should always insure yourself. You should always do the right thing. But unfortunately, sometimes we get sued from left field, from something we've done unintentionally, one of our staff members, a family member, and people with money tend to be the focus of any litigation.
Sure. And defending an action, that can be costly, but not just in money, in time, but also emotion, isn't it? It really is draining.
Correct. And in a lot of instances, you can get insurance actually to pay for that. But as you say, the emotional turmoil and the time taken deviates you from the other things you should be doing in life. That can be very draining. And in a lot of instances, you want to be able to stop the litigation before it starts. That's really the strategy you should be following.
Now, I know there are other people out in the property world and on podcasts saying, oh, this is just accountants selling their services, trying to sell you trusts, trying to sell you complicated structures. You don't need it in this world. And in fact, then there's the other extreme who end up selling, let's use that word gently, products, services, structures that people don't need. So I think we've got to take the cautious path in the middle. This is not for everybody, and this is not specific advice. It can't be. We don't know your circumstances. But having dealt with a whole lot of, well, at Metropole in general, we deal with higher net worth clients, with established clients, with business people. Sure, we've got a lot of beginning investors as well. And some of those people who get to the level of having quite some asset base, they wish they'd put all these things into place at the beginning stage when no one gave them the advice, Ken.
Correct. And also maybe when it wasn't important at the time. And, the classic example I see time and time again is the young professional. They've got their jobs, they've been promoted, they may have changed employers, but all of a sudden they're the general manager of a production facility, as an example. While the job itself doesn't create litigation potential, the occupational health and safety responsibilities that are now on the shoulders of that person can be significant. And a funny story I heard, maybe not so funny, was, someone was telling me they were promoted to a position of general manager of the production facility. And one of the directors came over to them, shook their hand and congratulated them and said, and now, by the way, you're responsible for all the occupational health and safety concerns or issues that happen in this place.
Well, what sort of things should we be concerned about? Why should we be more concerned today, Ken?
Look, there's the obvious thing of if you've done the wrong thing, but, you should get into trouble for that. You should get the right insurances. But we find in a lot of instances, insurance companies don't necessarily pay upfront easily or all the money, and the courts can actually distribute the responsibility between people. So they might say the insurance company pays 50%, but you have to pay 50%.
I guess we're getting a bit more litigious. What's the right word? I'm not too good with all this, Ken. But some people see it as an easy road to financial security. I read somewhere a while ago that Australia is the third most litigious society in the world.
Yeah.
That surprised me.
Yeah. Behind
US, I bet's number one.
Well, it's got the top two positions through LA and New York. So,
oh, right. Okay. Yeah. I've seen those TV shows. I'm actually watching a great one on Amazon Prime at the moment where the solicitors are out there to get their pound of flesh. But okay, so we should be more concerned because we're living in interesting, challenging times. But what about those people who say, no, you're just paranoid, Ken. You're just wanting to sell your services?
Well, look, paranoid may or may not be the appropriate word, but who wants to work?
You're not paranoid if you're right, by the way.
Correct. Who wants to work over a lifetime or even a shorter period and build up assets to have the risk of losing them? The family home, investments, it's your children's dowry that you're going to pass on to children or grandchildren that could be lost. So we find three categories of people are very interested in protecting their equity. And that's people obviously in a very litigious industry, other people who have built up large assets, even a property portfolio. I mean, if you've got 3, 4, 5, 6 investment properties, that's 3, 4, 5, 6 families. You could, you don't repair one property, a child falls over, injures themselves, all that's at risk. And then we find people at the other end of life, when they're moving towards retirement, they know they can't rebuild their asset base. And they know they want to protect it for use in retirement and to hand it down to the next generation. So it's a critical thing to take into account. We insure our home, we insure our car, So we should look at protecting the equity that we've built up.
I guess this is another place it can come from as well. You've got kids, I've got kids. And I remember when I used to be sitting with clients, I'd sort of jokingly say, in my blended family, I've got 6 kids. I guess that means 2 or 3 of them are going to get divorced, but I don't know which ones they are. Ha ha. Well, unfortunately, now I do. But having our assets in the right structures means that the outlaws don't have access to them.
That's right. And I think we've got scheduled a podcast in the not too distant future in relation to estate planning. And that is, how do you actually pass on those assets to the next generation in a safe and robust way? But
You've got to keep them in the first place.
you've got to
don't you?
keep them in the first place. That's right. It's how do you keep them in the first place to be able to pass them on?
Right. Okay, so there's all sorts of things that can happen, whether it's car accidents, your house is underinsured, neighbours, your new job, as you said. A lot of people become directors of business, and now there are other responsibilities once you become a business owner or a business director. So what are some of the typical strategies you recommend to your clients at Metropole Wealth Advisory? And maybe we could then also talk about some of the mistakes you've seen people make.
Yeah. And I think it's important to look at directors. I mean, because there's recent legislation that's come into force where you've got to register yourself as a director. So please, people in the audience, make sure that you're registered. But another area we see a lot
Now,
of
this is new.
this is new, just in the last months.
Yes, so you've got to get your director's number. It's a little bit complicated. It doesn't take too long to do. You've got to do it if you set up a new company, but this is already something retrospectively. So if you own a company that is a trustee of your family trust or of your super fund, so a lot of people have got those family trusts. There's the company that's the
trustee. Yeah.
Sorry, I had a mental blank there for a sec. And so, Ken, you've got to, if you're not sure, at least speak to your accountant about how to do that.
Correct.
But yeah.
So people can be on the ASIC register as a director. One of the traps I see in a lot of instances is people are called a director when they're actually not on the ASIC register as a director. But unfortunately, if you portray yourself as a director, the name on a business card, you call yourself director, you then take on the responsibilities and requirements of being a director, because that person has the right to assume that if you call yourself that. So as a director, you can be sued, for fraudulent activities, for acting while the company or the business is insolvent. But more recently, any tax-related liabilities, a GST, income tax, the superannuation guarantee, the non-payment of those, the ATO or the relevant state governments can actually go and get the money personally off the directors. So payroll tax, land tax, as 2 items at the state level.
So they've actually gone behind the veil of a company and gone to the people running the company.
Correct. So they've put in specific legislation for tax-related matters. You can fall foul of one of those, particularly if you're in business. And you want to make sure that, again, I keep using the words, your hard-earned money that you've created, you want to know that you can keep it and actually use it. So as a director, you've got issues. Obviously, even as a PAYG person, if you've got occupational health and safety, it wasn't that long ago I heard a story where someone had underinsured their house and it burnt down, and they got their 75%, whatever it was, value for their house, but the house next door was burnt down.
Oh.
And therefore, the insurance company only paid that 75% on the house next door. So all of a sudden, the individuals were responsible for that shortfall on both properties. So the litigation can come from anywhere. And, I joke with my kids that I hope they never illegally downloaded stuff, because
Oh.
because now with copyright laws, you as the parent are responsible. And I noticed some of the video streaming services are starting to get smart on, you know, giving access to people who don't live in the same house. So that family wealth, and I use the word family wealth because most of us don't generate wealth for our own personal use. It's for the use and enjoyment of our family, the next generation. So we've got to be thinking much broader than it's ours. It's our family's money that we're protecting, and we've got a responsibility and a duty, I think, to protect it.
Sure. Okay, so let's look at some of the mistakes people have made while trying to protect things.
Yeah. So a lot of people buy assets in their personal name. So that creates a potential for litigation. You know, they didn't look at the potential of using trusts or something. You know, it would have cost a couple of $1,000s. So people say, I don't want to pay the money. But, you know, that's very short sighted. I mean, you end up with $1 million property in Sydney and similar numbers in Melbourne and a bit less in Brisbane, etc., let alone the family home, investment properties. So you've got significant assets even in the family home, let alone when you add investments. Another big mistake I see, can I say too often for me to joke about it, it's very often, people set up their business in a company, but again, they become the shareholder. So that means a successful business, you get sued, someone can take the shares of that business and have the assets that the business owns, plus the income stream. So you've got to be very, very careful. Another one, which is quite a out of left field, is superannuation. A lot of people say that superannuation is protected. But in bankruptcy, the pension stream you get is not protected. So you could lose that income stream. So there's different ways to set up your super fund and to make payments to actually keep that superannuation amount safeguarded. So there's sort of three typical examples I see. In a lot of instances, I also see even when people use a trust, they don't use the right trust. So, you know, they think they have asset protection when they don't, or they want to get a tax benefit from, call it negative gearing, and the trust they used won't give them that. So you've got to go deeper than that high level answer, use a trust. And I had a client who came to see me, it must have been about 3 or 4 months ago, 20 odd investment properties bought in their personal name. You know, the accountant said, oh, don't complicate things. But that's a big asset base with 20 families. And his solution, the accountant solution, was transfer everything into a trust. But you've got to pay capital gains tax. You've got to pay stamp duty. And more importantly, the family home in a trust is normally you lose the main residence exemption, meaning if you sell it, you would normally not have to pay capital gains tax on the family home. But in a trust, you actually lose that benefit. But having said that, if you put it in the right trust, if I can call it that, you can actually still retain the main residence exemption.
Well, I think the problem here, Ken, is that people see their accountant for accounting and their lawyer for legal things and their financial planner or property strategist, and the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. They're all experts in their own field, but they don't have a holistic approach. And that's, I know, one of the reasons why you and I and the team at Metropole Wealth Advisory have actually combined all these things. Now, we don't do it all ourselves, but we have external experts that sit with you to make all this happen. But the lawyer doesn't understand accounting and taxation, and sometimes even their estate planning intricacies. That's not their fault. It's not their area of expertise. So the accountant gave certain advice, but he was thinking about tax and simplicity. He wasn't thinking about the legal stuff. So that's a gap in the system for the average person. By the way, I know, you know, that the wealthy people, they don't have that gap in their team, their network, because they have a family office.
Correct. And they integrate those services so that the left hand does know what the right hand talks about. It's very important to make sure that those lines of communications are there, and that knowledge gap, if I can call it that, the gap between the individual and their profession, you can bridge it, but also create bridges between the various professions. And one of the things a lot of my clients, new clients, not coming on board, prospective clients, the thing they hate the most is having to go to the next professional and explain, what the other one said. And, even if they get it right, which is normally not, doesn't happen, it's they don't understand the right language. They don't understand the nuances. So
They each do speak different languages, and the smart clients we see, they sometimes try and join the dots, but it doesn't work, does it?
no, if it was that simple, the smart people would work it out. But more importantly, the smart people know they use their time better by doing what they do well and then engaging the services, but understand enough to know who to engage. So I call it more the building the bridges. It's not a matter of joining the dots. That simplifies it too much.
Actually, that's a good way of saying it. And so, again, these are the services that you and your team at Metropole Wealth Advisory provide. So, just getting the right asset protection without taking into account the estate planning and what the long-term plans are, what you've got planned for your wealth in the future doesn't work. So how should people go about protecting their assets? Let's have a talk about that. I guess the first step really is to have the integrated approach of legal, tax, accounting, estate planning, and also your future life changes, because you're actually talking about long-term here, aren't you?
Correct. We always talk about, do things with the end in mind. The 20-year-old who buys, or the 30-year-old who buys a house doesn't know the job that they'll have when they're 50. So you put in place strategies at 30 and then work out at, 10, 15 years later, it's not the most appropriate. So you've really got to bet on yourself that you're going to be successful. And if you are going to be successful, what did you need to have done? And
I
then
guess you've got to
implement.
invest in your future, don't you? So
Correct.
it is a cost now, and people think, oh, I can do it later. But I'd be suggesting invest in your future now, because you're going to be living in it for a long time, Ken.
And it's much, much cheaper if I put my accountant's hat on. It's much cheaper to put in place strategies at the beginning than retrofitting. So the asset protection strategies that we help our clients with, there's essentially four, but two in the main. As I said at the beginning of our talk, we don't look at protecting the assets, we look at protecting the equity. And when you protect the equity, that's when you do not trigger capital gains tax, stamp duty. You retain the main residence exemption, which is the free capital gains on your home. But more importantly, your home is normally exempt from land tax as well. So you keep those benefits. So how do you protect the equity is the strategies that we help people do. Yes, there's a lot of paperwork involved, like anything, but you just do it at the beginning, and that's 90% of the job moving forward. You've got to put those strategies in place. You've got to look at it more broadly than asset protection, because there's how do you do the accounting? How do you pass it on to the next generation? So hence that term, the holistic view, that even on a strategy of asset protection, you need to understand the touch points with the other professions and what should be occurring with those other professions.
Well, some people are probably listening to this. They've heard you before. They've seen you on our videos and podcasts. And in the old days, we did seminars, and they're thinking, oh, Ken's talking about a trust. Is that what you're talking about?
That is one of the items used in the asset protection strategy.
So what is a trust?
Yeah, so a trust is a legal document, a set of words that give rules of how you're going to operate, use your assets, for want of a better term. It's state-based law. That's why, every state is slightly different. And that's why the ATO has a lot of problems with it, because the ATO wants to be at a federal level, but trusts are at a state level. So, a lot of people say a trust is a trust is a trust, but that's not true. I mean, a simple item we've put in our trust is they don't stop after 80 years, which is a typical trust stops after 80 years, which could trigger capital gains tax, stamp duty. So if you're looking
People are going to say, hey, that's so long, I'm not even going to be alive then. But Ken, my first trust that I set up about 50 years ago is heading in that direction now. And in the early days, that wasn't part of what I did because no one ever taught me about that.
Yeah. And the number of clients I get where their grandparents had handed down their trusts with assets in there. Mm-hmm. So now the 80-year time bomb is blowing up in their face, in the grandchild's face.
Oh, you've just warned me about something, because I don't, but my sister has taken over one of the trusts from my parents. So that must be getting very, very close to that now.
And, with modern medicine and et cetera, people used to live to 65. Now it's not unusual for them to live to 95.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's going to be too much time in the future where, a lot of people will be over 100.
So what other special clauses do you have in the Metropole Wealth Advisory trusts that the average trust doesn't have? Because let's be clear, a trust's a document. It's a whole lot of paragraphs, clauses that you can put in to tell how to treat the assets that somebody has put into the trust. Okay, so anything else special people should be aware of?
Just to maybe explain that, a company constitution is driven by ASIC. So ASIC create the rules. So even if you wrote your own company constitution, you are deemed to have used the ASIC rules. Whereas in a trust, you write the rules. So you can basically write anything you want, and it's still a legal document. So trusts should be more purpose-built, because operating a business is different to having a share portfolio, is different to having property. So it needs to be more specific. The other big difference we've done, apart from it doesn't stop after 80 years, is we've got what we call a lineage clause.
A bloodline in some
which
ways.
Helps protect the capital to those descendants of the original people. And that's very important.
When we mention that to people, everyone wants that. It's weird that the average trust, the vast majority, don't include that.
That's right.
Everyone seems to want it. I think the other big thing is that when you ask people, do you have relatives overseas? Do you have, but they're not beneficiaries. That's okay. They're not named in the trust. That's not necessarily the case, is it, Ken?
That's right. So all the states basically, well, maybe bar one, but all the states basically have said, if there is a potential for money to go to an overseas person, we're going to treat the trust as a foreign trust. And if you're buying property, the stamp duty rate doubles. So it goes from about 5% to 11%. That's more than double. Land tax more than doubles. So if you ever got an audit, they actually go through and ask, oh, you mentioned a nephew. Who are all your nephews? Where do they live? What's their nationality? So you eventually will get caught. So do it right at the beginning and don't have those sleepless nights.
That's why you can't buy one of those trusts from one of the online websites. And unfortunately, that's how a lot of accountants do it as well. Again, we're back to the holistic approach. So I guess what I was wanting to make clear is it's not just as simple as, okay, I'll buy my assets in a trust. And interestingly, over the last years, you've gone back on the advice just because the world has changed. And in the past, we said companies are not an appropriate vehicle to own property assets. They have to own business assets. But for some people, in certain circumstances, for a small group of people, they make an excellent vehicle, don't they?
A phenomenal vehicle. And used properly, can I give the analogy? It's the same as getting, a 20% reduction in the purchase price of that next property. So that was a simple example, so don't take me literally. But that gives you an idea of the potential power of using a company over a trust. And as you said, Michael, it works in very limited circumstances for very limited numbers of people. So it's normally been taboo to talk about owning property in a company, but for a lot of our clients, they see the benefits outweigh the disadvantages. The main disadvantage being the loss of the 50% general discount if you ever sell. So you've got to make decisions with the best available information. And like I tell a lot of my clients, new clients, it's a Ferrari is great, or, they go fast, they handle well. But if you haven't been taught how to drive it well, you don't get the most out of it, or you push it too far and you end up killing yourself. Now, that's an extreme, of course. And it's the same with trusts. A lot of accountants don't actually execute and set up the trust and then do the annual compliance correctly. And on an audit, then the ATO would find a lot of holes and maybe deny a lot of legitimate tax deductions.
So, Ken, I think some people are going to be listening to this and say, okay, Michael, Ken, you've rambled on for half an hour. What do I actually do? You haven't told me what I've got to do. And the answer is right at the beginning, we said we can't because we don't know your circumstances. So I think really my intention, Ken, yours was to make people aware that they should seek advice. The intention was to make them aware that there are risks and there are ways of minimizing the risks. And the specific strategy you should be using should be built on a solid foundation, not just looking at asset protection, but also looking at tax and accounting and estate planning, but also future flexibility. That's one of the hard ones. And then on top of that, you got the asset protection. And I think if I could be bold enough to say the benefit of working with Ken Race and the team at Metropole Wealth Advisories, that we look at the assets, including all the options, because Ken has got that background of not just the real estate and business and financial planning and accounting, but he's seen it all and dealt with a whole lot of high net worth clients. Having said that, your services aren't just for high net worth clients. I mean, they're your specialty, people with more complicated business tax and expats. Boy, expats have got their own issues. We can talk about that in just a sec. But you're also happy to help beginners, aren't you, Ken?
Correct. And it's a different service. And, even if you're not in a position to buy property, for argument's sake, as an example, it's getting you set up properly, getting started, simple discussions on budgets, on, the number of people that I see, they don't know where their money goes. And at the end of the month, I'm $1,000 short. And when you say, what do you spend your money on? They don't know. So we do have a capacity to talk at that level, and it's a completely different service. And that's our way of helping people get on the wealth ladder, so to speak.
Sure. So whether it's asset protection, you're looking at estate planning, which we talked about a little bit, or just a structure review. So I know one of the services you do is actually see, is it appropriate? It's a sort of a health check, isn't it, that you do?
Yeah, financial health check, for want of a better term. One of the banks use that term, so I'm not stealing their words, but just to give it context, it's not a medical health check, it's a financial health check. So are you set up properly? What could you be doing better? So we look at three questions and three answers. It's what can be fixed, what can we prevent you doing wrong, and what can we help you improve? And different people will fall more or less on either one of those three.
So if you want to have a chat with Ken, go to metropole.com.au. I'll leave a link in the show notes and look at the Wealth Advisory tab. And what you can do is just leave your details and we'll have a chat with you. Ken, you're happy to have a chat with people to see if your services can help them?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, we talked just briefly about expats. We got sidetracked a bit, but they've got a whole different range of challenges, with asset protection, but also just with tax. It seems that the government's been cruel to them. And I know that you specialise in that. You've got a lot of expats who you've been helping. What are the big challenges you're seeing them with?
The big challenges is really they go away. They stay a bit longer than they originally anticipated. They buy assets overseas. There's a completely different tax treatment when they come back. If they sell the family home that they had in Australia, the ATO just knocks them out, because what normally would be tax-free is actually now taxable. So there's lots
That's
of
why I
issues.
said they've been treating them as secondary citizens and giving them a hard time. If they still pay tax, sorry, they're meant to pay tax in Australia, aren't they?
Well, yeah, and they call it TAP, taxable Australian property. So if it's actually fixed to the ground in Australia, the ATO can always tax you. So if you sell a house, the money is in Australia, they tax you. Versus I'm overseas and I sell Australian shares, the ATO doesn't know about it, they don't care. You get taxed where you're coming from. So we help a lot of clients, particularly when they're getting bonuses or in relation paid as shares that then get vested. So the timing of those vesting of shares can make a huge difference in the tax treatment, how they do it. And if we expand the discussion from expats to also new citizens coming to Australia, there's a set of rules that they've got to follow, and there's things that they've got to identify and do before coming to Australia, which can significantly reduce their tax liabilities once they're here. And the other one that, it just grates my nerves is, the tax treatment on an Australian who goes overseas to work, 3 months on, 3 months off, 6 months, whatever, while leaving his family in Australia. Then there's another tax treatment for them because they've left their family behind. Not a nice way to put it, but because their family stayed in Australia.
Yes.
There's a different tax treatment. There's things that you may be able to do to improve that situation. But even if you can't, you want to know about it because you want to know what your tax liability is going to be so you don't spend the money and then say, I can't pay my tax bill.
Sure. So, again, we're not giving answers or solutions because there's not a simple one, but I guess we're making you aware of problems, challenges. So go to metropole.com.au. You can click on our range of services, and while we have specific strategic property advice, Ken and his team at Metropole Wealth Advisory give a complimentary, not complimentary as in free, but a complimentary as it complements the other services, strategy of wealth. And it all interrelates. That's part of the holistic approach that, as we said a while ago, the wealthy people already have in their family office arrangements. And here's a service that we're providing to help ordinary Australians have access to the same at a much cheaper cost, Ken.
And not needing anywhere near that same level of asset base to justify it. So we've sort of turned the model on its head to be able to make it accessible by a lot more Australians than would otherwise be the case.
Well, thanks for your time. And a minute ago, you hinted that the next podcast we're going to be discussing is on estate planning. And that's a topic I'm looking forward to, not because I'm getting that old now, but the answer is it's important for people even when they're younger, isn't it?
It certainly is. We never know when we're going to be hit by the proverbial bus, or we could get an inheritance. And a lot of situations we see is, I'm going to hand assets down to my children. Then all of a sudden your children have those assets. How have they prepared themselves? So it actually, you should look at estate planning through multi-generations.
Makes sense. So thanks for your time today. Look forward to having that chat with you again real soon.
Thank you, Michael.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
In my mindset moment today, I'd like to share with you the number one way of being really successful. Now, just for fun, a couple of days ago, I did a quick Google search on how to be successful, and it came up with 1,260 million articles in just 0.4 of a second. Now, that's a lot of blogs saying things like 7 steps to be successful sooner or 10 tips on how to be successful in life. But clearly, there's not one definition of success. In Arianna Huffington's book, Thrive, she explains we need more than money, we need more than power as measures of success. And I agree. But there's one trait that I've noticed in all successful investors, business people and entrepreneurs that I deal with. And I've been dealing with successful people in my mentorship program and clients at Metropole for quite some time. And those who I'd class as really successful have the capability of gratitude. Now, at heart, what I'm talking about here is the fact that all abundance starts with gratitude. Gratitude is something that most successful people practice. If you think about it, gratitude actually creates more abundance. The word gratitude is very closely connected to the word appreciate. In economic terms, appreciation means increase in value. Another definition of appreciation is, I guess, to fully understand. When you're truly grateful, you communicate that you fully understand another person or a situation, and therefore you increase the value of that person or situation. But let me be clear. This is about choice. The fact is, you can choose to be grateful. Truly successful people choose to be grateful. Look, think about it. I bet you've noticed there's a lot of successful people out there who aren't really happy. What's going on there? Well, what's going on is they're looking outside to create meaning in their lives. Instead, the productive thing is to start with something that's internally generated, something that you've got total control of, access to, choice over. So your first choice to become more abundant, to have true success, is to be grateful. But be grateful proactively. Look for any area or anything that you can be grateful for. It's your interpretation. The choice comes from you. It's the first step to having a really successful life. The way I handle this is every morning before I get out of bed, I have to think of 3 things that I'm truly grateful for. And they've got to be different every day. So, success, abundance starts with gratefulness, gratitude, and you have the choice. Well, I hope you got some benefit from the last 3/4 of an hour or so with my chat with Ken Race. And all we were hoping to do was open your eyes to the fact that it's not as simple as just buying a property, shares, Bitcoin, whatever, in whatever name you think is easy at the moment, but you should put some planning in place. And if you did learn something from this and you know somebody else who'd get some benefit, please tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. There's a share button on every podcast app, or tell the world by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to this. Now, we've got a bundle of reports and ebooks for you, including some reports from Ken Race. If you go to podcastbonus.com.au, and you can collect some information that'll help you get some better ideas about being a more successful property investor. And I'll be back again real soon, but you can catch me in between on social media. Just look for Michael Yardney. Why not join my private Facebook group? Go to Facebook and look for the Property Update Facebook group. And as I said, I'll be back again real soon. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael, but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?